You know how the old saying goes, if you want to be the best, you got to learn from the best. Well, Carl White, the Marketing Animals, with their Freedom Podcast, they've got the best loan officers out there, and in a changing market, why don't we learn from the best how to make these transitions so we can have a great second half of 2022. It's free of charge. The Marketing Animals and Carl always do a great job with everything, so check it out. All you have to do is click this banner right over there. Now on with the show, and listen, back in late March, I told you that the 19% increase to HUD's budget was a really bad idea.
It's a trap!
That the $60 billion that they already receive is enough money, and that they didn't need to go to $71 billion. The reason? Well, HUD has been wildly underperforming with its objectives with $60 billion, so why would $11 billion more be any better? I mean, I say if you're going to fail and it costs money, fail with $60 billion, not $71 billion. Case in point, it is the explicit objective of this administration through HUD to advance equality and equity for all communities across the nation. By the way, feel free to read in between the lines on that statement. The administration is, in part, trying to accomplish this goal via HUD through Executive Order 13985, otherwise known as Advancing Racial Equity and Support of Underserved Communities through the federal government. Now, I, for one, think that this is a great title. 1, racial equity, great. That is great. We want that. 2, supporting underserved communities. Once again, great. We want that. 3, via the federal government, or in this case, HUD. I'm not so sure here. They don't have a great track record in this area. Nevertheless, based on Executive Order 13985, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, issued, quote, Equity Action Plan in response. Okay, let's see here. The president issues an order, gives HUD $11 billion more on top of the $60 bill to make good on its charter to help underserved and minority communities. HUD jumps on it because, wait, why is HUD jumping on this? Why are they just acting now? Hasn't HUD for decades been working on action plans to support racial equity in underserved communities? I mean, if so, why isn't this just business as usual? This is all they're about. Why does HUD need a new equity action plan? I mean, who knows? Maybe they couldn't fit it in with a $60 billion, so they need $71 billion to actually fulfill their charter. Okay, so HUD's equity action plan is in place. Like we finally with HUD, get to see our tax dollars at work doing worthy work. So, what does this new HUD action plan entail? Are you ready? Let's go through the list. Via the FHA, activities to maximize home ownership for creditworthy first-time home buyers. What does that even mean? Seriously, what in the hell does that entail? What are the activities that maximize creditworthiness? Now, for $71 billion, I want details here. Frankly, I don't know what any agency could do legally to increase an individual's credit worthiness. I mean, isn't my credit worthiness explicitly up to me? Isn't that the whole idea behind credit? Unless the federal government is willing to co-sign and put their credit worthiness on the line for my mortgage, then this point of HUD's action plan seems like a bit of rubbish, doesn't it? Further, does maximizing credit cost HUD any money, or is this simply a new policy that needs to be added and enforced? Now this is going to get a little bit slippery. On to their next point. Increased engagement with non-traditional lenders, including community-based institutions, to better reach underserved communities. Question: who provides the funding for the community-based institutions? That's right, the federal government, HUD, with their $71 billion. So here's a question. With HUD's action plan in response to this administration's Executive Order 13985,
Execute Order 13985.
advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities through the federal government, is HUD creating an entirely new loan for those of specific ethnicities to advance racial equity? Kind of feels that way. Frankly, if they do, I think it's a great idea. Specifically in the case of African Americans, from a national perspective, embarrassingly underrepresented in home ownership. Now, if HUD is funding these non-conventional community-based lending institutions, yes, this could cost a fortune. Moving on to their third point. Efforts to ensure manufactured housing is a thriving source of affordable, quality, durable, and safe housing for Americans, including implementing up-to-date manufactured housing, construction, and safety standards. I love how they open that point. It's an effort. An effort is an attempt. It's a good old college try, isn't it? And maybe it's the effort, not the solution, that's at the core of why HUD seems lackluster with its results for the past 6 decades. But again, an effort to ensure manufactured housing is thriving. This is not a money issue. It's a policy issue. Knock back permits, reduce tax tax barriers, and do away with some costly government regulation. Essentially, all HUD and the federal government needs to do is get out of the way of manufactured housing and that industry, and they will fill the void on their own, and there is no money needed by HUD. This is all policy, and it should have been there for decades. Their next point, improving asset and credit building for renters interested in transitioning to home ownership. Like, what in the heck does this mean? One, doesn't mean anything, does it? Two, didn't we already cover this in point number 1? And 3, whole thing's a pipe dream. How do you improve asset building without giving things of value away? And if we're talking about low and low to moderate income families, build all the assets you want, which is stupid. They still can't afford to buy a house in this market. We're not addressing the issues. They're not even close to being able to buy a house. This point, I mean, it's a laugher. And again, it doesn't cost a darn thing. And finally, proposing a 40-year term for loan modifications rule. Currently, under the OMB review, which will allow mortgagees to provide borrowers in default with a loan modification for up to 480 months to help borrowers reduce monthly mortgage payments and retain their homes. Now, this doesn't cost anything, but as we said yesterday, the 40-year-old loan has a long, rich history of really not working. And we know this from decades of studying the Japanese 100-year mortgage. And the truth is, if you're not paying on a 30-year loan, you're not going to pay on a 40-year loan either. A modification is like a refinance for a person that would never in a million years ever qualify for any type of refinance whatsoever. Why? Because they'd be declined for not being credit worthy. So what do we do instead? Let's basically do the refinance via a modification and add an additional 10 years to that 30-year loans to give more time to screw things up. And trust me, they ain't gonna let you down. And I hate to be a Debbie Downer about this, but none of it really makes sense. Nothing HUD said with their action plan has anything that resembles a plan. This is primarily policy more than HUD's budget issue, and the fact that this is just now coming up as ideas with, understand, no plan seems to be the reason that HUD frankly is failing in its stated objectives or its charter. Here's an idea for HUD. Maybe it's time for a new plan, and I think we should call this one Start from Scratch. What do you think?